Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague also from British Columbia. So here's the situation that we're in right now. We know that the supply chains are really stretched. We've gone through a difficult time. It all started a year ago, like I mentioned, when we did have rail lines that were down. We've gone through this pandemic. We're hearing that there are shortages, container shortages, and this just exacerbates the problem. So because we're so stretched right now, we don't really have the luxury to be waiting. There's also timelines here where we have farmers that we've heard who need fertilizer and they need seed. And so they can't wait. If they don't plant within a certain time period, they don't have a crop. We've heard that there's medical supplies that do have to get across the country. So we don't have the time to be waiting for this.
One last question. The Honourable Member for Langley-Aldergrove.
Thank you. I want to bring to the attention of my colleague from Kelowna Lake Country. Businesses in my riding, Langley-Aldergrove, almost as far away as you can get from the Port of Montreal, who are being negatively impacted by labor disruptions at the Port of Montreal. I was talking to Mr. Van Noort of Van Noort Bulbs the other day, and they, of course, import bulbs from the Netherlands for sale across North America. This is, of course, a very seasonal product. This business has already been negatively impacted by pandemic-related supply chain challenges, and then the strike just was the last thing that they needed. And I just wonder if the member has a comment about that, how important it is to have good labor relations in this country.
Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country, 15 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank my colleague for his question. Absolutely. I think I know I don't have a lot of time here, but this just shows how important our supply chains are, and we can't wait. I'm also speaking to people in my riding that have irrigation companies, and they're missing parts that they're waiting to get from Europe. So this is across the country, and we don't have the time. There are timelines that businesses need product, and if they don't get it, then workers are going to be laid off. So it definitely.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and also thank you very much to the member for Kelowna Lake Country, who is also our Shadow Minister for Export Promotion and International Trade, whose toes I will probably step on a bit talking about supply chain. Did you know, Madam Speaker, that she was also the 2006 RBC Woman Entrepreneur of the Year? And like myself, she's an alumni of the University of Calgary. So to her, I say, Mahulita Gamswas. I will lift up my eyes is the translation from Gaelic. I will also be stepping on the toes of our Shadow Minister of Infrastructure from Regina Capel. Well, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, this is a situation today where the government could not fail. The stakes were just too high for the government to fail. We've talked about it a lot today, but I'll repeat some of the core facts again. The Port of Montreal is the second most important port in Canada. The previous 19-day work stoppage last summer cost wholesalers over $600 million in sales, Madam Speaker, over a 2-month period, and it took 3 full months to clear the backlog created by the stoppage. And I'm also sure we've heard previous today that every day the port is shut down, the economy loses $10 to $20 million, Madam Speaker. The words of my leader earlier this week are true. Because of the Prime Minister's failure to get a deal done, jobs and contracts are at risk, and millions of dollars will be lost, Madam Speaker. So I'm going to approach this from the transport perspective today, being the Shadow Minister for Transport. I'm going to look at 3 things in particular: imports, which affect the cost of living; exports, which affect our economy; and then processes and infrastructure, which of course also affect our economy. So when we're talking about imports and the cost of living, and Canadians are seeing the cost of living increase, RBC expects that groceries alone will go up 2 to 2.5% in 2021. But we can look at a couple of things. And the first thing is the change in demand that we have seen over the last year. Canadians have been at home through the pandemic. They are unable to travel. They are unable to go to the theater or to go to their favorite restaurants as a result of several lockdowns. And so we're seeing a way greater demand for consumer goods. And of course, this is putting additional pressure on our supply chain. The second thing, Madam Speaker, and this has been brought up previously, but of course, is the container shortage, which is having significant impact on supply of goods. For example, Madam Speaker, India, the world's second largest sugar producer, exported only 70,000 metric tons in January, less than a fifth of volume shipped a year earlier. In addition, Vietnam, the largest producer of the Robusta coffee beans used to make instant drinks and espresso, is also struggling to export. Shipments dropped more than 20% in November and December. So very big changes in supply that we are seeing there. As well, we are hearing that the strike at the port isn't necessarily going to shut down auto production. It's going to make the supply chain even more inefficient and increase costs. Canada, as a manufacturing jurisdiction, we have to constantly compete with the United States and Mexico, and a critical component of being a competitive manufacturing jurisdiction is having a reliable trade infrastructure. That was in the Financial Post. Now, we have seen action from the U.S. government in regards to the container shortage, Madam Speaker, but not here. And perhaps that's the reason why that the Freight Management Association of Canada sent a letter to the Minister of Transport using the example that pulse growers and lumber exporters are losing international sales while shipping companies are sending empty containers back to Asia. One last example I'll give of the strain on supply right here in my hometown of Calgary, Madam Speaker. Bow Cycle cannot import enough bicycles. Have you tried to buy a bicycle last spring or this spring? I have, Madam Speaker, for my son. They are almost impossible to come by. But these are the problems we are seeing as a result of this government's inability to handle supply chains, to handle our port capacity. And that's why it was so critical that this deal get done. Port backups are described as the worst ever, and delivery times are the longest in 20 years of data collection. In addition, a federal maritime commissioner described the West Coast backups as the worst that we have ever seen. Finally, Madam Speaker, I will give the quote that in December, spot freight rates were 264% higher for the Asia to North Europe route compared to with a year ago, according to a risk intelligence solutions manager at a supply chain risk firm. For the route from the Asia to the west coast of the U.S., rates are up 145% over last year. So again, Madam Speaker, I say we are seeing a decrease in supply. This is resulting in the cost of living being driven up as a result of this government's inability to handle their supply chains. So let's talk about the impacts, which I know my colleague who spoke previously has heard from in terms of stakeholder quotes as well and conversations with stakeholders. Karen Proud, CEO of Fertilizer Canada, says hundreds of thousands of tons of fertilizer enter through Canada through the Port of Montreal during the spring seeding season. These fertilizer products are destined for farms across Ontario and Quebec and the Atlantic provinces and ensure that farmers are able to produce the crops that keep our grocery aisles full. These products are now in jeopardy as a result of the strike at the Port of Montreal. So we are seeing the impacts that this government's inability to manage ports, supply chains, and unfortunately this dispute are having on our exporters. Brad Chandler, CEO of Hensall Co-op, says, Hensall Co-op is Canada's larger exporter of edible dry beans and non-GMO soybeans. We have established relationships with customers in over 40 countries. These relationships are currently at extreme risk. And this is what businesses need right now. They need certainty. They need stability through supply chains. This government is not providing the means for these exporters to have it, and they are putting the economy at risk. Greg Cherewick, president of Pulse Canada, says, it was imperative to avoid a labor disruption that would damage the Canadian pulse and special crops industry, our international reputation, and the wider economy. Again, another example of the failure of this government to manage supply chains and this dispute. Finally, from Ron Lemaire, president of the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, there is also significant concern that a labor stoppage at the Port of Montreal would aggravate backlogs in other shipping modes, including rail, which the previous speaker mentioned, as shipments are forced to be diverted, particularly as Canada continues to grapple with the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is of utmost importance that the Government of Canada use every tool, Madam Speaker, and I'll talk about this more, at its disposal to avoid job losses, increased food insecurity, and higher food prices, all which could result from a strike. So then let's talk then for a couple minutes, Madam Speaker, about processes and infrastructure of our supply chains, which touch closer to the transport file. KPMG recently did some recommendations and in regards to how businesses can adapt to these supply chain challenges. What are businesses doing? Well, they're examining micro supply chains. They're starting to reduce risks rather than costs, which is a scary thought to consider that businesses are doing this. But the KPMG CEO Outlook survey indicated that around 2/3 of CEOs believe that their supply chains are in need of a complete redesign. Well, the government should take a note from this, from these CEOs, Madam Speaker. Many stakeholders believe that this government does not have a handle upon their supply chains. And were I Minister of Transport, Madam Speaker, my first task would be to map out these supply chains, all modes, so that we would understand completely where the faults lie. In addition, stakeholders believe that this government does not use data and metrics to the greatest benefit possible in an effort to amplify and maximize our supply chains. Finally, Madam Speaker, I will go to infrastructure. In conversations with the Port of Vancouver, unfortunately, I must say that the expansion of the Port of Vancouver, which is so desperately needed, is currently under review with the current environmental minister. Increasing capacity is crucial. Many members of the Port of Vancouver board believe that they will run out of capacity by the mid-2020s. Our infrastructure capacity gap is closing, and other countries believe that our ports do not have the capacity for the current demand of goods. So in closing, Madam Speaker, I will say that this government, once again, and this Prime Minister has been too little too late. I've seen it with the aviation sector. I've seen it with the supply chain capacity. And unfortunately, we've seen it here with the Port of Montreal dispute resolutions. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments, honorable